Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody for inviting me, taking the time. I wanted to begin by giving a quick introduction to Greenstone and our firm and the work that we do, and then talk a little bit about our specific experience with renewable energy financing and some of the learnings that we have in terms of how we think we can apply this to create better policy. So Greenstone is a boutique investment bank that focuses exclusively in the renewable energy sector in India. And we do two things. One is capital raising for developers, and the second is M&A. So if a developer is looking to build solar projects, wind projects, or hydroelectric projects, we'll reach out to different investors, typically institutional investors like private equity groups or pension funds, to come in and help finance these various platforms. On the M&A side, if someone is looking to sell a project or a particular portfolio of assets, we'll also find investors that come in and finance those specific opportunities. So from my background and my experience, what I wanted to do today was to talk about, specifically from a financing perspective, some of the things that we've learned in the utility scale market as well as in the off-grid market. So to begin, I want to talk a little bit about what we've seen in the grid-connected utility scale space. And to define this, what I call grid-connected utility scale projects are any power projects which supply power through the existing grid or transmission infrastructure to commercial, industrial, and retail customers, which is a different market from off-grid or rural areas where we are now trying to establish connections to provide them electricity in the first place. About 4 years ago, when I first moved to India, I took a very close look at the utility scale market, which was just developing. And at that time, I think there was about 2,000 megawatts or 2 gigawatts of installed capacity. From 4 years ago to 3 years ago, that went from 2 gigawatts to 3 gigawatts, then from 3 to 5 or 6. Now we're at 15 or 16, and we'll probably go to 25 in the near future. And I think that when I look back to see what worked from a financing perspective, I think that there are a couple of things that the government did from a policy standpoint that was very helpful. And I think the two things that they did was, one, to open the markets up for private investors and private capital to come in, and two, to facilitate that through auctions and a mechanism which allowed people to bid at scale, or at least have the opportunity to invest at scale. And a lot of people initially would come to us asking us for financing and low cost of capital, and often you think that financing is a big challenge to the sector. But the reality is today, in utility scale solar and wind, financing is no longer the problem. It's finding good quality opportunities and bringing them to the market. And I'll take just a minute to talk about what's happened in the last 6 months, particularly in solar, because there has been a tremendous amount of reduction in tariffs and pricing. But what's happened essentially is that the government, I think, did such a good job where the sector looked so promising from a year ago that we had dozens of investors come in and strategic groups come in to start taking a much closer look at the sector. And the amount of capital that was raised behind these platforms was actually very significant. And in the last 6 months, when you look at how much solar allocation has come out, there's been 2.5 or 3 gigawatts of capacity which has been allocated. Some of these groups have the ability to do 1 gigawatt of capacity per year, and we have 20 to 30 really credible groups. So in a reverse bidding construct, just supply-demand, the demand for people to invest in the space versus the supply of opportunity, there's an imbalance. And that broadly is what's driving tariffs down and pushing people to become aggressive because there's just not enough opportunity to invest. So what I see today in the utility scale market is we don't have a challenge with financing. We should encourage the policymakers instead to just focus on providing opportunities. The market is now self-sustaining and it's on autopilot. When I flip gears for a minute, though, and I start talking about the distributed generation or the off-grid sector, I think that's where there are some challenges and where the policy focus needs to start to shift. Where I see utility scale as being now self-sufficient and financing being readily available, that still is not the case for off-grid arrangements, some of the discussions that we've been having today, primarily for a few reasons. I think the biggest reason is scale of investment. So it's great to go to one village and install 10, 20, 30 kilowatts in a particular area, but these types of investments are, from an institutional perspective, actually very small. $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. Startups are raising this type of capital and are getting somewhere. But the larger big ticket investors, groups who can put significant amounts of capital, 25, 50 million, $100 million plus, those groups have largely been absent. And the challenge from their perspective is manyfold, but it's not that they don't want to invest. In Spirit, there's capital available, people want to invest. The question is, where is that money going and how can I deploy quickly enough? So just like what we saw in the utility scale world, what I think should happen is that the government should focus the policy on figuring out how to present opportunities for these bigger investors to come in. So one of the ideas that we have, for example, is why not go to a number of these villages, have the government say, hey, we're going to launch an auction or a tender, and somebody come and bid for building, not 100 rooftops, but 10,000 rooftops. That'll attract the attention of very significant players, and if you give that framework for investment, I think that the investors will come. So broadly, that's been the experience that we've had on the utility scale side. Off-grid, I think, has a long way to go, but I think that there's a lot that we can learn from utility scale development and just the general market trends. In conclusion, I think that utility scale, I think, is a great market, will continue to grow. Distributed generation off-grid needs probably more policy focus, but overall, I think that the sentiment is actually quite good from an investor perspective. Thank you.